Hi, friends, and welcome to the last episode of Bite Size Bish for season 6. Now, don't worry, your girl is coming back, hopefully in about a month, but this is going to be the last episode of Bite Size Bish I do for season 6. I'm going to be coming back fresh and excited for season 7, and I can't wait to see what's in store for all of us because I, quite frankly, don't know yet. But for today's Bite Size Bish, I'm, as promised, going to talk about part 3 of the Valley reunion because there were a lot of things that came up on the reunion that it was hard for me to put into words on Instagram. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. I also watched Next Gen New York City, and the whole Ariana and Charlie storyline is I can't. I feel like my brain, between the food recalls, the state of the world, I cannot also take Charlie and Ariana hooking up. Can't do it. By the way, with the food recalls for people who are nervous, like myself, because people who are immunocompromised and rely on prepackaged foods, people with disabilities and things like that, it can be a very scary time. So what I suggest, farmers markets, going to locally grown farmers markets in your area that usually will be free from the recalls, but you can talk to the people at the farmers markets about what do they use on their products, all of that other stuff. And for lettuce, I continue to recommend Little Leaf Farms or other greenhouse grown lettuces that are used rainwater. So they're basically impossible to be messed with. But I mean, at this point, it's almost like, all those food inspectors and safety measures that we had, it's almost like stripping those is totally a bad decision. But, when you have a guy with a worm in his brain in charge of this stuff, these are the kind of decisions that you get. So I'm done with my rant about that for now. So the Valley Reunion Part 3 was very interesting. I felt like it should have been called like the Valley maladaptive coping strategies, because I feel like that was the whole thing of the night, like starting with Danny, like in the beginning when we start off talking about Danny's alcohol use. He was talking about at the finale party, he was so intoxicated, that he could barely stand. And he was telling the group, I've never been this intoxicated since then. I have been in therapy and I am really looking at my relationship with alcohol. And I was like, bro, your own words and actions at this reunion are telling me that this is a lie. And here's why I say that. You cannot be examining your relationship with anything. Alcohol, food, sex, relationships, substances, non-substances, gambling, all of it. You cannot examine your relationship with any of that without accountability, rigorous honesty, and ownership. I mean, literally, those are the components that you need to learn and grow. And so Danny is just like this whole reunion. He just like did more of the same. He's saying the right things, but his behaviors tell me that he's not doing what he's saying, which is no surprise to me. So the group called out his BS and then talked about an incident that happened after Jasmine and Melissa's wedding. It was like an after party, but there were so many people talking and it was hard to parse out. So here's what I got from that. There were two things. So there was an after party where Nia told Zach, don't tell Daniel, which I think it's so funny, by the way, that Nia calls him Daniel, because here's the thing I'm going to say. I'm a huge nickname person. When I love people, when I'm fond of somebody, I love a nickname. I think her consistently using the name Daniel, it just furthers this dynamic that she's like a parent and he's like a child, But Nia asked Zach not to tell Daniel about the after party because Danny cannot control his drinking when he does drink. It's very apparent. So Lala was saying that that's a red flag, which by the way it is, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. But then the other piece was that Jesse, which he was reluctantly talking about this because, red pilled bros got to stick together, I guess. At least that's what I'm gathering from this administration. So as you can tell, for the last episode of the season, I have lost my chill and my filter. So bear with me. But Jesse found Danny at a bar. It was after Jasmine's wedding, but I'm not totally sure if it was the after party. But after the wedding, he was drunk in a tank top with no shoes at the bar. And Jesse said, quote, he wasn't receptive to being dragged out. And if you're red-pilled bro Jesse saying that, that means he probably created a scene. and was certainly not in any state to be making good decisions for himself. And so going back to Lala, to me at this reunion, she was, this season would have been not watchable if it weren't for Lala. I really do believe that. I can't believe like Lala was the savior of the valley, but I think she was, because in this reunion, Lala was calm. She was metered. She was so assertive, but kind and caring in the way that she was saying things. She really is trying to give Danny and Nia feedback. And it's because she's a sober woman, because in that community, you live or die by taking feedback and looking at your relationship to substances. So I think, a big kudos to Lala for, just talking to Nia. She wasn't nasty. She didn't curse. She kept her cool, but she was just like, I'm concerned about this. Nia is trying to manage Danny's drinking behaviors, which is literally the definition of codependency. And I feel like codependency is a virus that spread, and Kristen started jumping in and she's like, no, that's it. I'm protecting Nia. And it's like, Nia needs to protect Nia. She doesn't need you to jump in, because what Lala's trying to do is she's trying to tell Nia, like, I've seen these behaviors before. I know how to understand this. Lala is a sober woman actively working a 12-step program of recovery. And let me tell you something. So in inpatient rehab, where I worked for many years, I participated in meetings like in grad school. You had to attend AA and NA meetings to get an understanding of, addiction in the rooms and things like that. And in the program that I worked in, I became very familiar with the 12-step program, with the big book of AA, and, a lot of that world. And if you don't understand the world of addiction and recovery, sometimes it's hard to understand this, but in the rooms of AA, ability to spot red flags around substances and giving honest feedback about it are life-saving tools, truly. People will die from the disease of addiction if they are surrounded by enablers. They will. And that is really, really sad and really, really scary. The people, when they get sober, it's sometimes people hit a rock bottom and they say, I want to do better, or I notice this is an issue. But for a lot of people, they don't hit a bottom, or it's everyone else that is concerned about the behavior, but not them. And so one red flag I noticed is like Danny's drinking was the conversation of the season, and it's a problem for everybody else but him. And that's what tells me that it is a problem. But seeing denial like this is actually dangerous. And so I think that it triggered Lala, and it's triggering sober viewers. I have a huge sober community on my Instagram at Your Bish Therapist. Go over there. Everyone in the comments is like, thank you so much. In recovery or, in the program or whatever. And it's so easy to spot it. There's a saying in the program of AA, you spot it, you got it. AA loves a good saying, and I love a good saying too. You spot it, you got it. Meaning if you're in the know and you can see it, you can understand that this is a problem. And so I think Lala is legitimately concerned about Nia, and she's trying to help Nia understand the depths of Danny's problematic behaviors, because I say this all the time, but alcohol is, I believe, the most dangerous substance on the planet. It is so socially acceptable. In fact, it's weird. Like, I don't drink at all. And still to this day, even with all my health issues, people think it's weird. They think, and I'm like, okay. Alcohol is the only drug that will really kill you when detoxing if you don't do it properly. It's very dangerous. And because it's so socially acceptable, people forget how dangerous drinking can be. And especially, here's the thing. Danny's drinking involves lying, hiding, secrecy, and blaming, which are all very indicative of an unhealthy relationship with anything. But the most concerning part is the lack of willingness on his part to own really anything. And so I just appreciated that Lala and Brittany, they understand the consequences of ignoring red flags in the name of love. Brittany talked about protecting Jax for so long that seeing women in denial, AKA Nia, it triggers her. And I think that she's talking about it triggers Brittany, and it's going to trigger people who have been in these situations. They know it when they feel it. And seeing Nia constantly, the way that she held onto his arm at the reunion, the way she calls him Daniel, the way that she pats him, it's all very codependent. Al-Anon, by the way, is a wonderful program for people who love someone with an addiction, who grew up with someone with an addiction. It's a 12-step group for family members or loved ones of people who struggle with addiction. And here's why I recommend Al-Anon. And I've participated in Al-Anon. I think it's great because we need to know the role that we play when we are in a relationship with someone who doesn't feel that they have an issue, or even if they do feel like they have an issue, there's a lot of reasons to still, go to Al-Anon. But one of the greatest gifts that we can give loved ones is just not blowing smoke up their ass, just like being honest and holding partners accountable is really what you need for anyone to learn and grow, regardless of alcohol or substance use. And so I think that Lala and Brittany are really triggered seeing Nia fawn and do all of these things because that's a problem. That's not going to help Daniel or anybody else. So Danny said, I did use alcohol to cope, but then he kept blaming others for bringing the anxiety and stress upon him rather than understanding how he creates his own problems. And he kept referring to quote unquote heightened states, which that must be something that Danny and Nia learned with whoever their therapist is at the church or whatever. But Danny used the term heightened states to mean that other people are responsible for his emotions. And I've said this 1 million times. The only person who's responsible for Danny's behaviors and his emotions is Danny. It's not Nia. It's not anybody else. It's Danny. And until Danny is ready to say, you know what? I need to stop blaming everybody and focus on myself, I don't think that he's going to fare very well. And so there's a concept in psychology called locus of control, which describes the degree to which people believe that we can control our life outcomes. So that's like an internal locus of control, feeling like we have agency over our lives and can control our own outcomes, as opposed to an external locus of control is ignoring our role and blaming others, which leads to higher anxiety, chronic stress, and learned helplessness. So think about this. If every time something bad happens, and let's just go with this theme of religion with Danny and Nia and say, well, the reason this is happening is because of God. Well, it's fine to have faith and it's fine to be religious and spiritual and practice, but the example goes to show that if you say, well, every time something bad happens, it's because of this or this, you're going to have learned helplessness and not understand the role that you play in your own issues, and two, how to fix them and change your behavior moving forward. And so it really is a dangerous spot for Danny to continue to blame and blame and blame, but it's also very common in people who have substance use disorders. And I think the other thing is I get the sense that Nia claims that everything is fine at home. In fact, Lala said that she hoped that Danny and Nia would get divorced if what we watched on the show was an accurate glimpse behind the curtain. And Nia insisted that their home life is vastly different than what's depicted on camera. So what I assume that she means is that Danny seems to have a pattern of binge drinking. So binge drinking, which by the way, you can still be an alcoholic and binge drink. To be an alcoholic or to identify as that or to have a powerlessness over alcohol, you don't need to drink every day. Binge drinking is just as dangerous. It's, technically defined as a pattern for men and women, a certain number of alcoholic drinks in an hour. I think for men, it's 6. And that pattern of binge drinking, I get the sense that Nia says, well, Danny doesn't drink at home, and when he's not drinking at home, things are fine. But to me, addictive behaviors, they don't turn on and off like a light switch. And I think that she's minimizing to protect her family unit due to her scarcity trauma, which I've talked about from the beginning. One of the things, too, that I was really impressed by, so even though Danny couldn't own his stuff, I was impressed by Andy assertively but respectfully challenging him. I think that Andy almost followed Lala's lead, where it's we don't need to be mean, we don't need to be rude, but we're gonna, call Danny out. And, Andy said, if you're consistently behaving badly when drinking, isn't this an issue? Danny said he had rare bad moments. When Andy said it's semi-consistent on the show, it seems like you have a poor relationship with alcohol. And I appreciate that because, again, this is life-saving for folks who are in denial. Denial can be deadly and very dangerous. So I think when it comes to this subject, when you love someone, you can't have kid gloves. You have to take off the gloves and you have to be like, all right, here's the real shit. And it's hard. It's not easy. But what I really, really loved is Janet shared how her history of SA shaped and contributed to her reaction to Danny. And so what Janet shared is that she experienced SA when she was 12 years old. She cried discussing how a part of her innocence was ripped away. And I think that's really profound because people who have experienced that is like, it's like a piece of you is gone. There's part of you that's just different. And it's hard to understand unless you've been in that situation or you've treated it or things like that. And so one thing I love that Janet said is she said prior to this, she was also abused by her father, who was an addict. And I thought, oh my gosh. So not only was her guard up with men in general, Danny triggered every single mortal wound that she had, every emotional wound, psychological wound, every wound. This man just triggered it. The Janet hate to me is insane. Like, I understand not liking her, but she really navigates these situations very well. And she said something very profound that I needed to touch on. She said, all the therapy in the world doesn't change the way your body responds to danger. And I was like, I got chills when she said that because she's so spot on. Complex trauma has profound implications, neurologically, emotionally, cognitively, behaviorally, profound implications. And so what happens, and I say this not only as someone who's treated trauma, but I'm a trauma survivor myself, we tend to become justice warriors because we didn't receive that justice. And so we see something. So Janet's wounds were triggered. She felt like she didn't get justice for herself. So she saw what was happening with Danny and she was holding him to task because she wanted to get justice in some way, shape, or form. She probably didn't realize she was doing it. But not only do trauma survivors tend to become justice warriors, we have an overactive nervous system that can falsely signal danger. So part of our brain, like the amygdala and the hippocampus, can make us believe we're in danger when we aren't if we have complex trauma. And so this is why that pop psychology claim of like trusting your gut, it's not always appropriate because the thing is like, do I believe that we know what's best for us? Yes, but when you're triggered, when you have complex trauma and you are physiologically triggered, you may feel that you're not safe when you are. There are things that happen called emotional flashbacks of where you feel emotionally today the same way you felt 20 years ago, but you have to remind yourself, I'm an adult now, I'm in charge of my safety. This is now, it's not then. And that is the way that we can refrain from acting on misfiring nervous system and brains, functioning and all of these other things, which I hope that makes sense to everybody. Because sometimes we can't trust our gut because our bodies are in fight or flight, or we have this trauma response and our body's telling us something that it's like, no, girl, we're safe. It's okay. But we really feel like we're not. And what I appreciated is that Jasmine talked about being collateral damage because she was. She was the only one who experienced Danny's inappropriate behavior, but yet she was the one who was heard, listened to, and acknowledged the least. Everyone was like listening to Lala about it because I think that Lala has a way of speaking that is easy to understand. And sometimes Jasmine has a hard time expressing herself. But it's really true that Black women's voices are often ignored, especially with their white counterparts. And so I am really grateful that everyone was just able to shut up and hear her. And she was able to be truly seen and heard because Kristen says she sees and hears people, and then she does like really awful things, which she got caught lying about a lot on the reunion. But one thing I'll say is seeing Jasmine and Melissa so happy and seeing, their beautiful wedding. And Jasmine was like, Melissa was the most beautiful person in the room and they're getting ready to start a family. I was just like, oh, I feel so happy for them. And it just truly was like the bright spot that the Valley desperately needed. So when it comes to Kristen, here's what I'm going to say. I'm extremely disappointed in Kristen. I was a fan. I don't know that I am anymore. I don't want to be extreme because, it's like humans are complex and human behavior is complicated. But for me, there were so many things that happened this season with Kristen, and it's like she was willing to own it, but because she had to. She had no other choice. She was caught on camera lying multiple times, and I wish that Kristen just would have called it what it is that she's a Nia and Danny stan. And I think the only reason that she's now saying she's holding herself accountable, I think because she's trying to win the audience back, if I'm being honest. I think her whole thing about like being a survivor, but then, questioning Janet's trauma. So it's like, I'm grateful that she owned that because she did do it. Because, Danny did all these things on camera too. And just because you're caught on camera doesn't mean you have to acknowledge it, right? So I will give Kristen that. But I just think that she picked the wrong team and supported really shitty behavior in the process. And that's what happens when you're like, have blind loyalty and alliances to people. You are going to end up supporting really shitty behavior. And I appreciate that she's friends with Nia. Nia seems like a wonderful person and needs love and support. I just wish that Kristen could have taken herself out of it. And I understand she was postpartum and she was dealing with her own stuff. And that is another factor that is nuanced to this. But also I just think she really has to look at which lane do you want to go down here when it comes to being a true advocate for survivors? Because, by the way, speaking of that, Lacey, the whole Jesse and Michelle stuff I'm tired of talking about Jesse because I just can't with him. But basically, Jesse finally admitted that he trusts Michelle with Isabella. And then he kept saying, but, and everyone was like, there's no but. So Lala made the amazing point, which I think Mandy and I talked about, is that Isabella's first heartbreak was her parents' divorce. So Jesse over-focusing on the Aaron situation is absolving himself of guilt and sadness that he probably feels from just the natural hurt that came from Isabella. Parents need to get divorced if they're not happy. Kids are always better off in two happier and more functional households. But there's still always going to be upset and sadness around that for children, right? There's just going to be. And so I think that was a really excellent point. And they also made the point, which I said on my podcast last week, which is, Michelle wanted Aaron to go the distance. She was really clear with him about if you move in, we're going to be together. And then Aaron broke her heart and was a gross asshole about it. And so for Jesse to blame Michelle is not fair because they made the point. What if Lacey and Jesse don't work out? Which, by the way, is very possible. And here's the thing I'm going to say about Lacey. Part 3, help me understand, okay, here's why she's with Jesse. So I think Jesse likes to get himself in proximity to wealth and importance, even though he has none. He doesn't know how to manage finances in any way, shape, or form, yet he wants to be in the proximity of wealth. And I think to him, Lacey seems to live a lavish lifestyle. There have been rumors about she received a settlement, whatever. I don't care how people get their money or what they have. I don't count people's pennies. Do your thing, boo. But what I'm saying is that Lacey was jumping in ways that I was like, oh, you're part of this problem. And there it is. There I see it. You're trying to jump in and say something to Michelle on behalf of Jesse, but then you're trying to be like, no, I have your back and I support women. And it's like, you know what? Lacey calls everyone else a misogynist, but she does not recognize the misogyny that's coming from inside the house. And I think that it would really benefit her to look at that, because here's what I have to say about this. If I had a boyfriend who I saw that this is how he treated someone who he once loved and no longer loved, I would get up, turn around, and walk away and never look back. And the reason for that is that it's easy to be kind to someone you love them and when you're starting a new relationship, but what happens and how do you behave when when the love is gone, when you no longer love that person or when you're not in a relationship with them anymore? And so I think, to be honest, Lacey is ignoring those red flags because she probably thinks, I'm different. A lot of girls make that mistake, or women, I should say. I'm different. I'm going to get him to change. It's what Brittany Cartwright thought. And Jax is literally unchangeable, sincerely, to the point where I rarely will even mention his name. It's like a curse word. It's like when I say his name, I feel like the Babadook is going to come out and be like, ah. But the point of it is that when you are seeing this man treat the mother of his child like this, and you're participating in tearing her down or, defending him, well, you're part of that problem, honey bunny. And good luck to you when Jesse no longer loves you anymore. So I don't know. Good luck to Lacey. So the last thing I'll say about Kristen is she discussed her tendency to push people away due to fear that they will leave. And I wanted to talk about this because this is something that's so common for so many folks. Trauma, especially relational trauma, impacts our adult relationships significantly. So sometimes when we don't receive the love we need, or even if we do, there's a lot of factors that can lead to this type of maladaptive coping strategy, which it is a maladaptive coping strategy. And what that means, by the way, is it's a behavior or thought process used to manage stress that provides short-term relief but causes long-term harm. So eventually that searching the person out and retreating, and pushing people away, eventually that's going to cause irreparable damage to the relationship. The problem with these maladaptive coping strategies is they fail to resolve the root problem and they worsen the original stressor, and it often leads to increased anxiety, depression, and substance use. And now we're back to Danny. Also, I feel like it needs to be said that Kristen is fearful that Luke will leave because he keeps telling her that he may not want to marry her after seeing her pregnancy monster, whom he wants to bury in a coffin. So part of this is like Kristen stuff, but part of it is like, I don't think Luke is a good guy. I don't think they have a healthy relationship, because you can't have a healthy relationship with someone who is unwilling to truly examine their own behavior, to own or acknowledge anything, and to commit to behavior change going forward. If Luke is continuing to say, you were the problem, this relationship is not going to be successful. And I mean, listen, I hope that Kristen's happy. I hope that I'm wrong, but I just know relational repair too well. And without certain components, it's just not going to be good. So I think that's going to be it for me today. So for everyone who's like, oh, this is going to be the last episode for season 6, here's where you can find me. You go to patreon.com/YourBishTherapist. I'm going to be doing bonus content, bonus episodes. We do chats, we do Zooms. There's a lot of things we do over at Patreon. And for less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks, you can be a subscriber. You can also go to my Instagram at YourBishTherapist. I'll be providing some vacation updates, sharing some personal pictures. Not of my husband, of course, because he's still very private and doesn't want his face being shown. And unlike some of the folks in the Bravo sphere, we're together forever and we love each other and we're making it work. So if he doesn't want his face shown, I mean, that's a shame because he's so damn handsome. You guys would be like, damn, Bish. I'd be like, I know. So anyway, you can check me out on Instagram, check me out on Patreon, and I will be back. I don't know when I will be back, but I will be back. My goal is 4 weeks. Depending on my infusion and my health issues, which just seem to be never ending. But hey, I'm managing it well. And the mantra that I have that I'll leave you with is that I can do hard things. And sometimes I'm tired of doing those hard things, but I can and will do them nevertheless. So for today, I'm going to say sending love to you and yours, and ta-ta for now until season 7. Bye. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.